We are here to talk about Verizon wireless commerce transformation journey from a monolith to a microservices-driven architecture. And we have been talking a lot about microservices. So we have our own journey to share, some learnings, and so on and so forth. So my name is Saurabh Rai Singhani. I'm a Senior Director of Technology at Sapient Razor.
I think we practiced this. You will introduce me, I'll introduce you. We spent pretty much a lot of time on this one. No, I think we are good.
Yeah.
So he's Saurabh.
Yes.
And I'm Keyur.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So the key is we were here last year. That was the first time we attended the Reactive Summit. That is in 2016. And frankly speaking, we had no idea about what Reactive is at that time. I mean, that's a frank input here. And we are here today ready to share our own experience in the Reactive space. So this is where we are. When it comes to Verizon Wireless, as you know, the top wireless service provider, and of course, we have Fios as well. Considering that, the amount of data that it generates, the amount of interactions that happen per year is just phenomenal. It's overwhelming. And considering that, we need some kind of framework, we need some kind of systems that actually support, not just in terms of during the peak loads, but even in helping the customers, access the website in a very rapid fashion. Now, what matters here is,
so why are we here? Why start with this whole microservices journey? And so once upon a time, back in 2013, that is pretty much when it all started for us. We actually were on a Monolith platform. It was built out of Oracle Commerce. Anyone who is in commerce? All right, we have one. We have few. So there are a bunch of platforms that are out there. Oracle Commerce, Hybris, and there are several others. We had one of them. Oracle Commerce is a pretty famous commerce platform that is out there. Everything was packaged in a single big ER file. And as you see here, the presentation layer code is like kind of JSPs. We called the services that it exposed as, closed as API with a SOA layer and everything in it. But it had its own challenges. And so as we actually kind of were working on this system and the scale of the system was increasing, the biggest challenge that we actually saw was lengthy build and the deploy times.
So practically, when a developer makes any code change, the way this whole framework worked is every single change that has to go through a build, just like any other code change, it has to go through a build, local stop the server, deploy, start, and so on. But due to the heaviness of the platform, it would take anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes on a local developer's machine to make this change, realize the output, and then make the necessary adjustments. Now, considering that, we would see empty desk a lot of times.
You can have
Where
a
are my
Starbucks
developers?
coffee. Yeah, you can have a Starbucks coffee. You can go out to gym, come back. The build is still running. Deploy is still happening. So we had all of that happening. The developers were not writing code as much. They were kind of spending time
lot
elsewhere.
of wait times, right? And not just that, developers would have to work after hours, probably. Work-life balance, that's another impact.
So we were always racing against the time. These are some of the real metrics that we had. 8+ hours of deploy cycle to production. 2 hours dev build. So dev build also includes the deploy to whatever test environment. All-night deployment parties. I mean, I'm sure many of you who are on Monolith platforms have the all-night deployment parties with the pizza coming in. 5 to 10 days for a new environment provisioning. 24 hours minimal to check in a single line of code and get that code into production with all the testing that is needed. That is the state we were in. So big teams worked on same code base, and by big teams, 50+ people working on a project was a pretty decent, it was a pretty reasonable team for us. Sometimes it spanned even more, 70+ people working on the same code base. It took 2 months to roll out a feature. We were adding new channels, And across the board, we were looking at IoT, we were looking at mobile web, we were looking at Alexa. So the traffic is increasing as we are adding new channels on top of this monolith. And it takes 2 months to roll out a single feature in each of these platforms. For every platform, I'm doing this big build, everything is impacted.
And I believe we had 2 code bases, right? One where the Java API was being used, and the other where the services are built on top of the Java API, and then practically it would add to the pain.
So our peak readiness strategy was, and this is the most interesting strategy.
Why don't we talk about what is peak readiness for us?
Yes. So peak readiness for us is iconic launch. Iconic launch is the coveted phone launches, iPhone launch, and so on and so forth. And one of the key things that Verizon really prizes, we never went down. Even some of the largest systems go down during the peak. We never went down during the peak, no matter what. But then our peak readiness strategy was, we do a lot of load tests. We do load tests for 6 months. We actually prepare for peak readiness for 6 months. We actually even had a site just for the peak, which is basically our strategy is disable everything. Disable persistence, disable API calls, disable whatever can be disabled, audit log, whatnot, to actually get ready for the peak. And that's how we used to work, kind of have another system. So think of the amount of effort that we were actually putting in to achieve what we were actually trying to achieve as an organization.
And one of the key factor here is the DBMS, RDBMS, right?
Yeah.
Everything was logged into the database. So
Yeah.
of course, you have to disable the audit logs. You have to disable all different kind of loggings in order to get the benefit out of the DBMS to perform.
Yeah, and scalability is add more hardware. We had 3 data centers all live, and then 240 plus JVMs, I think, right? 240 plus JVMs across data centers, so a lot of hardware, a lot of back power.
One more thing is about, can you go back to the previous one, just one, add more hardware. So I think one of our Capital One guys had a nice ad, what's in your wallet? That's a question we frequently get asked. What's in your wallet? Can you buy more hardware? Can you add more memory? Oh, come on.
Our each JVM had 8 GB of memory. I just wanted to kind of share that as well, So we went back to drawing board.
Sure. So we discussed with the business clients, what is the intent? What are they wanting to do? The digital platforms have been performing to a certain level. Let's say 10,000 TPM or 12,000 TPM or 30,000 TPM transactions per minute and all that. But that is at cost of those factors that we talked about previously. Disable everything, going blind, not able to get certain insight, difficult to postmortem the whole thing after the launch is done. And if you want to find out what were the issues, if you want to have some learnings from that, those were the difficult part. And we wanted to overcome those, business wanted to overcome those. And then we started looking at what are our options. And then we, I think, accidentally landed to Reactive Summit. And we looked at all the different talks. We heard a lot of experts. We went back, and then we did our own kickoff to see exactly where do we want to focus. We wanted to focus on performance. We wanted to focus on the reduction of infrastructure or the optimum utilization of the infrastructure. Looking at the deployment times, the amount of time the QA needs after the deployment is done, a lot of activities that gets kicked off after the deployment. So all of this needs to be shrunk into a way where the customers can say, yes, this is the experience I want. The voice of customer needs to improve. So there are a lot of factors that came into play.
So one of the key things that I want to call out is that we did talk to several industry leaders who had implemented, because Verizon, by scale, is probably a Fortune 100 organization. So before we went into kind of selecting the technology stack, or we wanted to move into these technologies, we talked to Walmart. We actually looked at their entire architecture for how have they used Play and Aka in their architecture, and how is it really helping. Walmart this is Walmart Canada. So Walmart Canada, incidentally, or by all good reasons, also was on Oracle ATG platform. And they actually kind of had moved out of Oracle ATG to this reactive-based platform for the orchestration layer. And it was performing like great for them. And that actually kind of infused that, yes, we are actually on the right track.
Yeah, I think we did compare quite a few options, right? We looked at Angular, we looked at Node, we looked at React.js. We looked at some of the other MVC framework, Rails, and so on. And then there are a lot of factors that went into decisioning. One of the factors was pretty much the resources that we had and we have today. A lot of them, most of them are Java-based, JVM developers. Yeah. So considering that, what is our path forward?
Yeah. So there were 3 key things from the business perspective, actually 4 key things from the business perspective that we wanted to meet. And I think Kure did talk about, well, we had some goals to meet. The number 1 thing that we wanted to meet for our business from this platform rehaul or transformation is the experimentation culture. We wanted to be able to innovate on a much, much faster basis. We wanted to actually have A/B kind of built within, not like browser-based testing tools, but A/B built within our platform where we can actually have different variations of product pages and other commerce pages, and we can quickly try and measure them, which one works better, and then float that one out.
Also, I would like to call out one thing here is organizations like this, the enterprises like this, there is a very limited room for experimentation at times. The reason is we are impacting customers, we are impacting their services, we are impacting these experiences, the quality of services and all that. So considering that, we have limited room for experimentation, but we want to make the best use of that room to provide the experiences that
And number 2 factor for us was speed. How can we actually experiment, but at the same time do it at a very fast pace, where we fail fast, whatever we have implemented, we try that out, and then we move on. But then above all, we need to be able to measure everything that we are actually building, because otherwise, how would we even know which way is the right way for us to go? But then the most important thing that Kure called out also is for enterprises like this, the most important thing it boils down to is while I'm doing all of this, I cannot impact quality, and quality here is performance, quality here is the code quality. We cannot introduce issues or bugs in the system and so on and so forth. So how can we have speed, experimentation culture, and all of good things that we want, but at the same time cannot hamper the quality of the code by any standards?
Plus, what we were seeking for ideally is the transformation. And when it comes to transformation, there are a couple of options. Either we can go and say, build, or buy, or how do we break down the monolith that we have into smaller chunks, microservices. I think I want it smaller than probably those containers as well. But right now we don't have a choice. All right, so there are certain principles that came out of this 2016 Reactive Summit. We understood, yes, async, we have been doing it for years, but then there is a development effort. A lot of developers have to write custom code, and then when it's custom code, there are always chances to fail. There are chances to go left or right instead of going a straight path. Stateless. Pretty much all the container technologies that we are using, whether it's a WebLogic, WebSphere, Tomcat, a lot of those with state. And we have had our own challenges with state, especially when it comes to state, and you have a container base, you have any issues with the JVM, all the customers in flight are impacted. Non-blocking, absolutely. We didn't have non-blocking in our principles, but after looking at the Reactive Summit, we said, yeah, something interesting, let's take a look at this. But from the customer's perspective and from the peak performance or the peak time perspective, we need high throughput. The data, all the resources that needs to be delivered were at high velocity. And of course, this needs to be ops friendly, because we don't want the ops to say, okay, let's add a new server, but we need 10 days to take this into action.
I think Kure already called out, I mean, these were the principles that we had when we were looking for a system. But the million-dollar question in front of us is, should we go ahead, buy yet another system, or should we go ahead and build it from the ground up? And we actually looked at all the platforms that are out there that are available, and there is nothing that meets our need. One important thing to actually call out is that commerce systems for a telecommunication organization are not vanilla retail systems that can just easily be built. They are very customized platforms with a very high dependency on all kinds of back-end data, account systems, and billing systems, and so on and so forth. So if we were to buy, we would not get any of the principles that we were trying to meet, and it does not even, and if we were to select any SaaS-based solution, it doesn't even work for us in that way as well. So the only solution that is left for us to achieve our principles and to meet the goals that we had is to build a system. And so we actually designed our own commerce system, grounds up, end-to-end with reactive commerce technologies, with reactive technologies. And I'll actually kind of high-level walk through this whole platform we have some slides to talk a little bit more detail, and we can also talk offline if you have more questions around this. The key piece is we follow domain-driven design principle. Now, we don't have all the services called out here in this, but these are the key domains: order, profile, product, store, recommendation, and so on and so forth. I couldn't fit all of them in here. But then these domains are not the microservices. These are the domains. The microservices are further broken down. The data sources for each of them have to be separated out. Now you can actually employ technologies or patterns such as event sourcing within one service and employ different kind of patterns within another service. You can have different technologies, so the architecture needs to be polyglot. I can actually have Golang if that works better in some things, but if Play and Akka works best for me for everything else, I can have that. The other part that is very important for us is the service exposure layer. How can we actually bring in all monitoring, security, governance, orchestration, registry, and whatnot, abstract that out of the core system, and then beyond have the experience assembly in such a way that adding new channels is extremely easy, such as when I'm actually putting in these new channels for chatbot and so on and so forth, they are all separate and they are using the whole ecosystem. And I think Mark called out earlier like a blob and a boundary, and that's exactly where we were kind of going as well, where for the external experience assembly pieces, it's kind of a living blob with different scalable microservices, so on and so forth, and each domain has their own subsequent services. And this upper layer of different front ends is actually accessing that data and then generating the experiences based on what we need. Now, commerce systems, as you know, are digital platforms, so there is an integration for CMS, content management here. There is an integration for templating, and all of that has to happen at different levels. And again, when we started looking at it, for us, experience is also a service. I mean, if you look at it, experience is kind of service where everything kind of gets assembled together. And then the final upper layer where the access layer kind of comes in. The other important piece here is the integration for PIM, where merchandising is happening and so on and so forth. The catalog, business is deploying the products or changing the products. How do we ensure that none of the business tooling is changed? That was one of the problem that we had and the mandate that we had, that business tooling across the board cannot change, and business uses the CMS platform, business uses PIM to update the data. They use boost and bury technologies out of search systems, and we ended up having the same products for whatever we use there, and then ingesting all of that data via asynchronous pub/sub model into these different repositories in a NoSQL way. And so you see the split of the repositories down there, and then that is then further exposed out. And I think we have been talking about streaming a lot across the board, and that's exactly the kind of technology we use to feed the data. So we have like kind of event listeners configured to feed the data into different repositories and expose.
And one more point I would make here is that are we there yet, 100%? No, it's a journey. So we initiated this whole thing somewhere in January 2017, and we had a couple of cycles so far, and the results have been phenomenal. We'll talk about the results in a few minutes. Right. But this is a journey. We are still going through the transformation. And
there are several different pieces that are still work in progress. Like we want to add machine learning models, and we actually talked about like how models can actually be exposed. We wanted to learn from each of the microservice ingest, but all of that is work in progress. We are working on these things. So at a higher level, 10,000-foot view of the entire architecture is pretty much something like this. We have mobile, desktop, native, and the Play and Akka technologies play, Akka actor models play the microservices for us. We have backend systems on the one hand, where point of sale, profile data, and all of that kind of is accessible to us. By profile data, it's account data, billing system data. And then we have Elasticsearch, where we actually use Elasticsearch as our catalog source. And all of our catalog gets loaded in Elasticsearch, and we look it up from there. What is not shown here is Endeca. We use all the search systems out of Endeca. So search happens out of Endeca. The catalog is out of Elasticsearch, and there are reasons for that, because we cannot change business tooling, like I said. And all the dashboards are built out of ELK stack. We have Graphite, Grafana. We are looking at a few more dashboards to add Hygia and a few others. Yeah, we already have Hygia. So at Verizon, Capital One pioneered Hygia for tracking all the DevOps activities. Right. And we at Verizon have adopted that. Not just that, we have customized it
to the extent where we really can track the progress for our teams.
Right.
Yeah. Now, one thing is this particular slide, most of the content from this slide is according to the industry information, so what's out there in public. But the one that you see in the green box on WebLogic is something that we have experienced with our developers' machines. And pretty much we have measured this, and 21% of the developers' time was spent in just waiting. And that's something which was completely unacceptable. We had to find a solution. We had to find some way to make this productivity go high. And this is one of the reasons why we have Play, why we have Akka. We were really impressed with the hot reload. Absolutely. We have done this. Now the developers are definitely more productive, and the productivity is, you can see very clearly, they are about 20 to 40% more productive with the stack that we have today. Also, this slide just talks about the benefit realization in terms of the first couple of months into the development. We measured this from Jan to March, I believe, a couple of months into the development cycle, and we really measured it to around 4K hours saved from the, if we were using the older stack, definitely we would have lost this productivity.
Yeah.
Also, one of the important things here is deployment. Development benefits are important, but on the other side, deployment, as Saurabh mentioned earlier, that we have around 4 to 8 hours of deployment cycle. It starts at, let's say, 10 in the night, and it lasts all the way 6. The deployment in the 3 data centers that we have, and pretty much the WebLogic itself, the way it functions, the way the deployments can happen, we cannot shut down all the DC. We have to still serve our customers. And in that case, we have to do 1 data center at a time and all that. So considering that, with the help of Play and Akka, how did we get there into deploying, let's say, about 10 or 15 or even 30 minutes across all the data centers? Very straightforward. Of course, it has a stateless nature. It is non-blocking, et cetera. But the stateless nature has helped a lot. We are doing rolling deployments. We don't really have to worry about the customers in flight here.
Yeah, that's a very big point, actually, that earlier our sessions were heavy, and they were causing several other issues, but the biggest challenge that we were actually kind of facing was the whole deployment cycle was like just too slow.
All right. So I already kind of mentioned in a way what is the power of being stateless. Of course, we are never dropping our customers in flight. Yes, they might experience. We actually message them saying we are experiencing X, Y, Z, and they can actually refresh and continue. Maintain the state, the cluster cache. So all of our customer data is, or the in-flight data is in Redis. We are using Redis as an effective cache mechanism, and with 2 or 3 milliseconds of response time for the Redis request, GET request, post, or a kind of save request. That's a phenomenal response time. Graceful shutdown of Akka. Now, this is something very important for us. It is connected directly to your rolling deployment. We do rolling deployment. We make sure that before the Akka JVM, a particular JVM is shut down for a deployment, it gracefully shuts down. It doesn't abruptly kill all the messages in the mailbox and then just restarts. So we are not impacting the customer when it comes to Akka. And of course, instant restart. That's a key. Pretty much within 5 seconds, you can have the module restarted. So we did a lot of load tests in the last couple of months and a lot of nights, of course. So we'll talk about the work-life balance later. But for now, what's important here is that there are a lot of teams across Verizon that perform load tests. Now, when they do the load tests, what is commonly observed when the load test results are shared, or what kind of issues they face? Oh, GC, we have GC issues. We have some hogging threads. We have some high CPU. Now, how we completely got out of that situation, all the 3 boxes that you see on the left, we completely got out of that situation. State is completely dismantled. It's completely outside. So no issues, no GC issues, no hogging threads. Of course, it needs a lot of planning, a lot of thoughtful planning, and on-demand need-based scaling. That's very important. So we have tested the scenarios. You call it chaos monkey scenarios, reducing the number of JVMs, increase the need, increase the JVMs on the fly. Also, one thing I want to call out here is the number of actor instances that we're talking about. We have let's experimented how many instances are going to work for us. For example, 10 actor instances would work per actor, per JVM, or would it be 100, or would it be 1,000? And something that I would like to share here is, if we do 1,000, yeah, it's great. But at the same time, all of the other applications running on the same machines were actually spiking in terms of CPU. So we had to find that balance exactly where, so 10, we made it 100, and we can actually add the JVM nodes for Akka on the fly without impacting the CPU, without impacting the other applications, and vertically scale up the applications. Also, now this platform is completely scalable for major events: Apple launch, Google Pixel, unlimited launches, more unlimited launches, and holiday season. Of course, we'll see more in 2018, but bring it on. And this platform is ready to take on the challenges.
This is number one reason for us to actually walk on this journey. We actually always, like I said in the beginning, that we always had to shift our traffic to yet another site, which was built just for holiday. That is not needed anymore. Enormous time and effort used to go to ensure that site is up and running, and that is scalable, and so on and so forth. Now our site that is currently right now can scale to any traffic needs.
And remember, this all planning is required for that sudden burst at 3 a.m. when pre-order starts. You see, that is the kind of spike that we see. We have to be ready for that spike, and that's all matters. It should not go down at that point of time.
Yeah, and we have, the measurability is extremely important. We had all kinds of instrumentation and all kinds of measurability, and most of it is custom built based on our needs. Application metrics, infrastructure monitoring, error analytics, log analysis and discovery, and user journey. And so some of the dashboards that we have. Okay, so some of the dashboards,
Pretty much it's all asynchronous logging. That's the key. And while most of the applications will have to do, let me just have the logs on one machine or one JVM, or let us shut down the logs because I cannot handle this right now, or the disk space is getting filled up. This architecture completely pushes everything out in a disconnected fashion. Elasticsearch, great resource, great tool for our logs. And we have, of course, Graphite, Grafana. We are able to track exactly how many messages are in the mailbox, what is the time spent in the mailbox, etc. All these metrics are key in order for us to understand exactly how the system is performing.
Gone are those days when we used to log into a box, like figure out based on, which cookie, based on cookie values, which JVM is the request going to. Then actually go into that JVM, look up that logs, and then try to figure out, half of the log is here, the other half is on yet another JVM. Now it's all consolidated for us. And that actually helps us in a very big way. And this is much needed, especially when you go to microservices-based architecture, because now the number of JVMs are just enormous. But the logging does not end here. We had business analytics logging. Entire business analytics generated out of log as well. The entire funnel getting generated out of log. User journeys getting generated out of log. The whole dashboards that are there can actually be very convenient when you are doing these big mega launches. Everything is visible from system end to end, which was not the case. We were like always, fingers crossed earlier, kind of everything works, but now we know.
Catch-up mode, right?
Yeah, we were always catching up, So,
Now this one, probably you can just take for 30 seconds and we'll take a break. The key here is on the left. It says what were the limitations or what are the challenges we had with legacy application. Call it legacy. It was just 2013 when we introduced this, and now it's legacy. Now when we went to the reactive platform, what are the benefits that we are seeing? What are the benefits that our infrastructure is seeing? The ops teams are happy with it. The developers are happy with it. Clients are happy with it. Customers are happy with it. Now this is what we need. The response times have gone down completely from the end user perspective, from the perceived response time, which used to be around, let's say, 6 seconds, has gone down to around 2.5 seconds. And on the server side, response times all are in milliseconds for each and every request.
And all the reasons for why it has gone down are all kind of given in here, right? Stateless, non-blocking, asynchronous, and so on and so forth. And that lets us build very powerful experiences that we were not able to build earlier. That decoupled architecture with the microservices underlying, and now we are actually able to do only PRT section load, and then the remaining section offloads, direct microservices calls for everything else, improves the performance to whatever we can perceive, yeah.
Sure, and this particular slide just talks about results. You can see we have categorized into probably about 7 sections. Conversion rates have gone up for the online channel or the digital channels, where we have implemented this solution. Page response times have been better now. Infrastructure cost or infrastructure requirement or the needs have gone down. As you can see, 1/8 of the infrastructure, or even 20, or let's say even if it's down by 80%, that's a great way to look at it. Deployment times have gone down, 30 minutes, max 30 minutes. Productivity has gone up. Work-life balance, yes, after we get out of this mode. And order completion time, that's a key one. With the page response times improving, and with the kind of experiences that has been designed, which are fast, which are suiting to customers' need, we have improved it from 41 minutes of time to completion to around 27, 28 minutes.
And the same results are on mobile channel as well. We are seeing 197% conversion rate, which is 97% higher. Sales are increasing, less effort to build. Again, there are 2 factors at play here. We redesigned experience as well as we changed the technology. The new experience is powered by the microservices layer, and that is way more faster, and that lets us build a very powerful experience as well. And the total cost of ownership, that is another important fact, right? I mean, now we don't have those expensive products that we used to have, and our infrastructure costs are much lower as well.
True.
So here are a few key learnings as we went through this journey. I think the biggest one, probably, one of the biggest ones is the adoption rate. It's easier for one group to adapt certain technology, but it's in an enterprise setup, it's very hard for us to be able to spread that word across. Every group has their own mindset, every group has their, so the question that keeps coming back is, how polyglot do you need to be? How many architecture selections do you need to have? And there are several different groups, and we are still working on a lot of this.
We are still working on between believers, non-believers.
Yeah.
We are still working on the friction.
Yeah.
We are still trying to smoothen things out. We are still trying to do all these goodies that we need to get back to the other teams and other groups. But it's a big company, a lot of different technologies, a lot of different architectures in place, and it takes its own sweet time.
But numbers kind of speak volumes. So finally, when the numbers, so I think convincing the management ahead of time that this is the way to go and this is what you would achieve is another thing, and then coming back later, and then showing the results is another thing. And that helps with the adaptation to a big way. The other bigger thing is the mental model challenge, right? The developers, the executive leadership, the leads, the managers, and everyone has this mental block on how the things should happen, how the things should perform. That I should have a separate ops team, that I should have a separate development team. That we do talk agile. We do try to form these smaller 2-pizza team, and everyone actually kind of tries. But until we actually go about changing the culture in the organization, you really cannot achieve what you're trying to achieve. And that mental block becomes rather, so one of the key things is it's easier for us to change architecture, what we learned. It's more difficult to change that mental block and to align the organization culture and to meet the architecture and to meet the demands.
And best practices.
And the best practices, yeah. Well, performance, right? So I think we did talk about we achieved a lot of performance, but we learned a lot too. I think one of the biggest things that we learned is that several times we try to take shortcuts when we are building application because we have to prove that the results are going to be there, that we're going to be fast, that we're going to build it all in 6 months, 8 months, whatever it is. But at the time when we take shortcuts, we don't apply the right principles up front. Event sourcing becomes kind of afterthought. We can start persisting right now. Maybe we put it in cache. We will apply all these principles later point in time. And that's where we saw is where the most rework comes in. The technology can be as good as it can be, but until we employ the right design principles and the right architecture from the beginning, and performance is not an afterthought, and scalability for which you actually ended up doing all of this is not an afterthought, you will be fine, but it doesn't happen always that way. Yeah, and I think we gotta have the, of course, performance as code and everything. The DevOps pipeline should be there, and that is forgiven. That is kind of has to be there with this architecture.
Yeah, there we
So,
go.
Yeah,
And yes, it is definitely helping balancing the work and life.
yeah.
Of
I mean,
course, there is a certain segment of people in the company who have to take up this challenge,
Yeah.
get it to everybody.
Yeah.
So there is a toll that you pay, but for a greater good for
the greater
community.
good. Developers
Yes.
are happy. Everyone is happy on working these kind of technologies, but it does take toll. I mean, digital transformations of this kind, when you are working with newer technologies, are not easy. So it comes with that. So with that, we'll open up for question and answers if anyone has any.
Sure.
Thanks for the presentation. On the topic of testing, so how does the team adjust? The language is obviously changes, like so programmer skill set, like picking up the new language of Scala and the Play framework. But on topic of testing, how is the testing culture change?
Yeah, no, I think we moved to TDD, BDD, which is more behavioral-driven testing. We use Cucumber with Rest Assured for all the API testing. And we actually use Cucumber with Selenium for all the presentation testing. And we actually plugged in both of them with Cucumber for the reason because even our manual testers can now write the test cases in Garki. And that becomes part of the build script. Our scripts are checked in as part of the code as well, the DevOps pipeline. And I think we are still working on building the entire DevOps pipeline. So I think that DevOps pipeline is still in progress, but our Cucumber adoption has been extremely high. I think we have almost 60 to 70% of automation rate
Yeah, I
at this
think
point.
it's around that. Yes. And then definitely there is some manual
And we use
testing.
we use Appium.
So when you embarked on this totally new paradigm, new framework, new programming language, everything, and what are some of the strategies you employed for reskilling and then training the workforce? And
Yeah, no, I think it's a challenge. I think, it's a mix, I would say. So you have to get in at least 10 to 20% of fresh people who are actually kind of knowing the technology. But for us, for Verizon specifically, the domain knowledge is very important. Because like I said in the beginning, right, it's not like vanilla retail that anyone who has commerce background and anyone who actually knows the technology can just come in and start working on it. There's a lot of business domain knowledge that is needed for us to be able to achieve in the design what we are trying to achieve in order for us to actually build it the right way. So short answer to your question, and this depends on which, your organization and everything, but for us probably 10 to 20% newer resources and 80% existing resources, but not like everyone migrating. Still there are others who are actually, there are still pieces that are still in ATG and they are getting migrated to the newer code.
And we could not do a head-on collision with Scala. That's something probably will happen over a period of time.
Yeah.
But we have to reuse and reutilize the strengths that we have.
Yeah, and I think that becomes motivation as well. I mean, one of the key factor is it becomes the biggest motivation for the team and for the people that they are learning new things, that they are actually aligned to the industry standards now. And people are actually ready to put in that effort, and that work-life balance comes into play to kind of pick up.
And Reactive is not a back burner. It's coming to mainstream.
It's coming to
not
mainstream,
just into the e-commerce space at Verizon. It is being used in some of the other spaces as well. And we are looking at using Akka streams. We are looking in a couple of places.
We learned
already.
a lot in these sessions itself that have been happening that we can now go back and like kind of rethink on certain other things that we are. So it's a journey, but it's a very interesting journey. Right?
In terms of changing the culture and the mindset, what are things that you did that either really helped or things you tried to do that really hurt your effort?
So, yeah, it is a big challenge. Comparatively, cultural change, organizational change, these are bigger changes. Architectural changes are nothing in compared. But to answer your question, we did quite a few sessions to basically bring the awareness about this technology. That's number one. We, of course, visited Reactive Summit last year. We had training programs. We still have training programs going on where we are training the existing resources, developers, architects, leads on these technologies. So that's something in progress.
I think some of the other things is we actually invited, I think we did invite Walmart to do a session for us as well. And they did a session for us with our connections and so on and so forth, where they talked about how this technology has been helping. And I think people relate to the larger business goals. If we can actually kind of prove the point that this is going to help and connect, this is not something that we are doing because it's cool and jazzy, but because it ultimately is going to tie back to the larger business goals, the mindset shift happens. And it's easier at the lower level. It's more difficult probably at the higher level.
And I think it's a journey to transform the non-believers to believers. It comes with the results that speaks for itself.
Right.
And then you see the transformation happening in other areas.
Changing business mindset for the tools that they are used to using, and because this usually is driven from IT organizations. Very seldom we see business drives this kind of architectural changes, right? So for us, we are still kind of using all the old tools for business. Eventually, now that the results are there, we may actually slowly start moving some of those business tools as well.
And again, it will have its own journey.
It will have its own journey, business tools.
It's a time-consuming process, yes.
Hi, Saurabh. So thanks for the session. I have one question. So every success story have some failures, right? So over I think it must be many months you guys have gone through the same journey. So just wanted to know if you want to share some of the failure or the issues that you have seen.
I can point out one before Saurabh starts. One particular is the interaction with Redis.
I'm about to say the same thing, yeah.
Interaction with Redis. Redis on the server side itself is super fast. 2 to 3 milliseconds, no problem. But we had a lot of challenges consuming that on the client side. And pretty much we spent almost a month to figure out how to consume at the same pace at which we are sending. We are receiving the responses we are not able to consume. So that was one of the failures to start with, which ultimately ended up into a success. But yes, that was one of the failures on our side.
Right. Anything else?
So congratulations for the fantastic case studies that you are sharing with us. I'm quite curious about how you have managed the design of the microservices, define it the correct way, in particular to define microservices that were producer and consumer, how you manage this aspect of creating a right microservice architecture and not falling in a sort of microlith architecture.
That's $1 million question, actually. That is so how do we, so I think if I understood it correct way, I think what you're asking is how do we ensure that the architecture principles were followed and it got built the right way that was supposed to, is that what you were asking? Okay. So I think that needs the most hard work because like I said, right, when we have timelines, deadlines, everything is in there, we try to run really fast. And as part of that, there is a lot that get missed out. And it's not an easy thing to answer. It always, so the best, what I would like to have in the real world scenario, and probably there are rooms where we need to improve as well, smaller teams, clear responsibility and ownership of those teams, primarily around domains, splitting of domains the right way, and then having a right kind of, the right technology set with a domain person and an architecture person, like kind of a technology person, tag team to lead that team. And reviewing the architecture at a higher level, making sure all the architecture touch points are aligned the right way. But all of this said is easy. Implementing it is where it becomes more challenging. And then how do you bring the code reviews and everything as part of the process? Where it does not become too cumbersome, but then it has to be done for certain things. And the last I would say is the key architecture patterns need to be developed by architects themselves. So everyone needs to be hands-on. If we have leaders who are leading but not really coding is what we felt, then there is something that you visualize and there is something that is there.
Also, we have do's and don'ts. We have best practices. Of course, those best practices are good today, may not be good tomorrow. We make necessary adjustments to those best practices as well. And it's, of course, shared with the team. And adapting those changes is key. Yeah.
That's pretty much it, I guess. All right. If nothing else, then thank you. Please feel free to reach out to us.
Sure. Thank you.